I pulled off the highway onto a narrow, gravel road that seemed to lead to nowhere. My headlights caught the dim glow of a rundown gas station, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the night air. The place was barely lit, just a few flickering lights, and the surrounding trees were so dense it felt like the world ended at their edge. I killed the engine and stepped out. The air was still. No wind, no traffic, nothing. Just the hum of those damn neon lights. It was the kind of quiet that gets under your skin. But after a 12-hour drive, I didn't care. I just needed to fill up and keep moving. As I started pumping gas, something felt off. There was no sound except for the faint gurgle of fuel and the low crackle of electricity from the lights overhead. I rubbed the back of my neck, trying to shake the odd feeling. Maybe it was exhaustion, but for a moment, I could have sworn someone was watching me. But there was no one around, just me and that empty station. I walked into the convenience store, the doorbell jingling weakly. The inside was just as depressing as the outside. Dimly lit, shelves half empty, and the smell of stale coffee hanging in the air. Behind the counter stood the clerk, a lanky guy with hollow eyes and greasy hair. He barely glanced up when I approached, his fingers twitching nervously on the counter. "Pump 3, I said, pulling out my wallet. He didn't respond right away. Instead, his eyes darted toward the windows, his lips pressed tight like he was listening for something. "Long night," I tried, but he just nodded, still not looking at me. "Careful out there," he muttered suddenly, voice low. "You never know who's out on nights like this." I paused, unsure if I'd heard him right. "What do you mean by that?" He finally met my eyes, but only for a second before glancing back at the window. "Just strange things happen. Shouldn't be out here alone, you know?" His words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. I shrugged it off, trying to ignore the crawling unease settling into my gut. I'd been on the road too long, seen too many weird people in strange places. This was no different, just another tired, paranoid guy working the graveyard shift. I handed him the cash, but right as our hands almost touched, the lights flickered. Then everything went black. The hum of the overhead lights cut out, leaving nothing but suffocating silence. "Hey, what the hell?" I muttered, squinting in the darkness. No response. The clerk had gone completely silent. The store felt smaller now, like the darkness was closing in around me. And for the first time, I realized how alone I really was. For a moment, I stood frozen in the pitch black, listening to the oppressive silence. My breath felt too loud, too harsh in my own ears. The clerk didn't say a word. It was like he'd vanished. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and hollow in the darkness. No response, just that heavy, suffocating quiet. I fumbled for my phone, the tiny glow of the screen flickering to life. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I swept the light around the store. Shadows jumped on the walls, stretching and warping, making everything look wrong. Shelves that had been half empty now looked like towering shapes, hunched and looming over me. Then I heard it, soft at first, barely a whisper. My name, Cade. It was faint, drifting from somewhere in the store. I spun around, pointing the light toward the sound, but there was nothing, just empty aisles and that damn flickering light from my phone. My heart pounded in my chest, the blood rushing in my ears. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, maybe even the clerk messing with me, but it felt too real, too close. Cade came again from a different direction this time. My skin prickled as I realized whatever was out there. It was moving, circling me, staying just out of sight. I stumbled forward, feeling my way around the counter, hoping to find the clerk, anything. But as I moved, I heard something else. Soft footsteps, barely audible but unmistakable. They were light, shuffling, like someone or something was watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. My phone screen flickered again, the shadows twisting and writhing in the dim light. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. All I knew was that I wasn't alone in that store. The lights flickered back on for just a second, long enough for me to notice the clerk was gone. The store looked the same, shelves still standing, counters untouched. But there, on the dirty tile floor, was a fresh trail of muddy footprints leading toward the back room. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed them, trying to ignore the dread creeping up my spine. When I reached the door, something caught my eye. I glanced at the windows, the ones that had been wide open moments ago. Now they were barred. Thick, rusted metal bars, locking me inside. I hadn't even heard them slide into place. The whispers came again, louder now, echoing from every corner of the store. They weren't just behind me. They were above, below, surrounding me. My hands shook as I backed away from the door, realizing too late what this place really was. This gas station wasn't just a stop on the road. It was a trap. Something lived here waiting for people like me. People who stopped in the night, thinking they'd be alone. The lights blinked out again. In the silence, I heard the soft click of the back room door opening behind me. Then nothing but darkness.
I took the job at the gas station mostly because it was easy money. Night shifts, small town. Nothing much to do but read a book between customers. It was an old place though, really old. The kind of building that made strange noises when the wind picked up. And the fluorescent lights flickered just a little too much for comfort. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, I'm not superstitious. The locals, though, they had plenty to say. People would come in late, grabbing a pack of smokes or a soda, and they'd share their stories. "You know this place is haunted, right?" one guy said, leaning in like he was telling me a secret. Old man Russell, the original owner, died in the back. Heart attack or something. Folks say they still see him walking the aisles at night. Another customer mentioned hearing whispers when the store was empty, or objects moving when no one was looking. I laughed it off. I mean, come on, ghost stories. But the more they talked, the more I noticed things. Little things. Started small, just little things that were easy to ignore. Late one night, around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like faint footsteps, like someone walking slowly down one of the aisles. I glanced up from the counter, but there was no one. I shrugged it off. Probably just my imagination, or maybe the old floorboards settling. Then came the tapping. Soft, almost rhythmic, like someone knocking on a door far away. At first, I thought it might be something outside, the wind rattling against the windows, but the sound felt closer, like it was inside with me. I walked around, checked the aisles, but nothing was out of place. The cold gusts that swept through the store didn't help. I'd feel it hit me, icy and sharp, but the doors were closed, and no one had come in for hours. Still, I told myself it was just the draft from the ancient air vents. Then one night, just as I was locking up, I heard it. A child's laughter. Light, playful, like a little boy running through the aisles. My heart skipped a beat. It was too distinct, too real to be in my head. I stood there, frozen for a second, straining to listen. The laughter came again, a little louder this time, echoing off the shelves. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I started walking toward the sound, calling out, "Hello," but no one answered. The store was completely empty, and yet the laughter persisted. As I moved, I could have sworn the shadows around me shifted, like the shelves were slightly off from where they'd been a moment ago. I stopped dead in my tracks. My mind was racing, but I still tried to reason it out. This couldn't be happening. Just couldn't. The laughter didn't stop. It was like the sound was pulling me deeper into the store, toward the back where the storage area was. My hands were shaking a little as I followed it, the aisles seeming darker than they should have been. I had worked this shift a dozen times before, but tonight everything felt off. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and that cold, eerie draft kept swirling around me, like something was moving behind me but never quite there when I turned. As I approached the back wall, something caught my eye. A faint outline, just barely visible behind one of the shelves, like a door frame. I could swear it hadn't been there before. Curiosity overrode my fear for a moment. I pushed the shelf aside, my hands trembling, revealing a small wooden door hidden behind it. It was old, the paint chipped and faded. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I reached for the handle and pulled it open. Inside was a tiny room, no bigger than a closet. The air in there was stale, heavy with dust, like no one had entered in years. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and in the center was a small wooden table. On it, an old leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The atmosphere shifted, colder than ever, making it hard to breathe. I hesitated but eventually reached for the book, my fingers brushing the rough cover. Opened it. The first few pages were filled with neat handwriting, detailing the daily life of the former owner, Old Man Russell. Then, as I flipped further, the entries became darker. He wrote about a young boy who used to come by with his father, a regular. They'd stop in for snacks after the boys' soccer practices. One day the boy never came back. An accident nearby, Russell wrote, his words frantic. And then the strange things started happening. Laughter late at night, cold drafts, objects moving on their own. Russell had become obsessed, convinced that the boy's spirit was trapped here, trying to communicate. I stared at the last page, my skin crawling. The final entry was barely legible, scribbled in a rush. "He's still here. Hear him. Every night." As I stared at the final entry, the air in the room grew impossibly heavy. The pages of the diary trembled in my hands, and then I heard it again, the laughter. But this time it wasn't distant. It was close, right behind me. I froze, every muscle locked in fear. Slowly I lifted my head, and that's when I saw him. In the corner of the room, a faint outline of a boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, just standing there watching me. His eyes were wide, hollow, and there was something desperately sad about the way he looked at me. The laughter had faded, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I could feel it now, he was trying to tell me something. He needed help. My heart pounded as he stepped closer, his form becoming clearer with each step. Then the lights flickered wildly above me. In that strobe-like chaos, I felt something icy brush against my hand. Blacked out. When I came to, it was morning. I was lying on the floor of the hidden room, but the diary was gone. Panicked, I ran to tell someone what had happened, but no one believed me. Worse still, when I returned that night to show them the room, it had vanished completely, like it had never been there at all.
I pulled up to the gas station just as the sun started to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The neon sign above flickered weakly, the buzzing sound of failing electricity barely audible over the engine. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent customer in years. Just one of those old, forgotten stops on the edge of nowhere. As I stepped out of the car, my eyes were drawn to the wall next to the door. Plastered across it were dozens of missing person flyers, some yellowed with age, others fresh enough that the paper still curled at the edges. A few of the faces were unsettlingly young. I glanced away, shaking off the creeping unease. This was just some local quirk, I told myself. People disappear everywhere, right? The attendant shuffled over as I started pumping gas. He was old, with a thin frame and sunken eyes, like he hadn't slept in years. "Careful in those woods, son," he muttered, his voice raspy. "Things happen out there." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced a grin and nodded, brushing it off. Local folklore, nothing more. With a full tank, I drove off, dismissing the strange warning as nothing but a ghost story. The road ahead narrowed as the forest closed in around me, the towering trees on either side casting long, creeping shadows. Night was falling faster than I expected, swallowing the last bits of daylight. The further I drove, the more isolated I felt. No signs of other cars, no signs of life. Just me and the endless stretch of asphalt winding deeper into the woods. The radio lost its signal miles back, leaving me with nothing but the hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel under the tires. Every so often, I'd hear something from the forest, branches snapping, leaves rustling in the breeze. At first, I figured it was just wildlife, maybe a deer or something, but then there were the whispers, faint, barely audible, like the wind itself was trying to tell me something. I cranked up the windows, trying to block out the sound, but it didn't help. The unease I'd been pushing down since the gas station crept back, and this time it wouldn't leave. I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw something. Movement in the trees, a dark shape darting between the trunks. I squinted, but it was gone before I could focus. My heart skipped a beat. Could have been anything, I told myself. Probably just an animal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I kept stealing glances at the mirror, expecting to see something staring back, but it was always just shadows. The road twisted again, and darkness settled fully over the woods, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the thick, oppressive night. The strange sounds from the forest continued, growing louder, closer. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as that uneasy feeling turned into a gnawing dread. I'd been driving for what felt like hours, but the road never changed. Just more trees, more shadows. My gut twisted with the realization that I was lost. I pulled over to check my map, hoping to figure out where I'd gone wrong. But as I glanced at my phone, the screen showed 0 bars. No signal. Perfect. I was in the middle of nowhere, and the woods seemed to stretch on forever, dark and endless. I stepped out of the car, expecting a cool breeze, but the air was frigid, unnaturally cold, like it belonged to a place far deeper into the night than this. A shiver crawled up my spine as I stood there, staring down at the map, trying to make sense of the twisted roads. But something didn't feel right. It was too quiet. Even the sounds of the forest had died out. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, movement. A figure barely visible standing between the trees. I froze, squinting to get a better look. It looked human, but something was wrong. The way it stood, its limbs slightly too long, too bent. My heart pounded as I took a step closer, and that's when I recognized it. The face, one of the missing people, the twisted, decayed features of someone who should have been long gone. They were here, somehow still here, like the woods had swallowed them and spat them back out. Their skin was pale, stretched tight over bones, eyes hollow and lifeless. Yet they were staring right at me. A cold dread washed over me as the figure moved, its body jerking with unnatural, broken motions, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. I stumbled backward, heart racing. I scrambled into the car and jammed the key into the ignition, but the engine only sputtered, refusing to start. Each time I turned the key, the figure inched closer, its steps awkward, deliberate, unstoppable. Panic set in. I was trapped. The car was useless. I had no choice but to abandon it, throwing the door open and bolting into the woods. My footsteps pounded against the cold ground as I ran, breath ragged, heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, I could hear the figure, always just out of sight, its slow, methodical movements chasing me through the dark. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the trees, but no matter how far I ran, the sense of being hunted never left. Then I saw them, more figures, some barely visible, half hidden by the shadows, others standing completely still, just watching. Their faces, those decayed, hollow faces, they were all from the missing flyers. Every single one of them. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The gas station, it was part of this. The people who disappeared never really left. They became something else. Trapped, twisted by the woods, and now they were hunting me. I stumbled forward, legs burning, mind reeling. Then, through the trees, I heard it. A voice, soft and distorted, barely more than a whisper. The old man from the gas station. I warned you, didn't I? And then, everything went black.